baby boomers.
I used to be with it.
Millennials.
Okay, boomer.
Generation X.
What's going on?
And Gen Z. What do they have in common? Not a lot, it turns out. But one thing they can agree on is that this is the political podcast they want to listen to. Welcome to Not My Generation, the political podcast that looks at political events, news, and happenings across the world and at home through a generational lens. Your hosts are Dr. Emily Stacy and Professor James Davenport, two political scientists from Rose State College. But the views expressed on this program are solely the views of the host and their guests and do not reflect the views of Rose State College, its administration, faculty, or students. Coming up on today's program.
They're trying to buck that trend by putting an octogenarian. They're still trying to maintain that status quo and cling to what is easy and what we know will win on both sides of the aisle, but they're catering to a base that's no longer there.
I think it's a poor argument that doesn't recognize what the courts have actually said in these cases.
This Supreme Court is afraid to make a definitive action on a lot of these that deal directly with Donald Trump.
If your candidate is on the ballot in all 50 states, you should be on the stage with everybody else.
And now, here are James and Emily.
Emily.
Sir, what's going on?
It's been like a political firestorm since we last visited, I think.
Mean, I feel like that's every time. Really, though, we work in a field that is ever changing. But yeah, I feel like we've been kind of walloped a little bit.
We had the Oklahoma primary elections, which had at least one very surprising outcome.
Yeah.
We had a state Supreme Court case that and then a reaction from the superintendent. We've had a presidential debate that has some people's hair on fire right now.
My stomach is still ulcery.
And then some U.S. Supreme Court decisions that have got a lot of people talking. So
still ulcers.
It's just going 100 miles an hour. And I feel like some people are, I do feel like there are people out there that are just like, losing their minds right now.
I feel like that, but I also feel like you're going to poo-poo this and kind of tell people to calm down whenever there feels like there is a crisis going on, right? There's always been, and we've talked about this as political scientists for the last decade at least, regarding, right, the identity crises, I should say, within both of, your major parties at this point. But it feels like the crisis has spilled over at this point, right? Particularly with the debate, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit. But, both of these political parties have huge issues with their candidates, with knowing their base, or really the lack thereof. They have no idea who the base is anymore. And it's really telling. But I do think that the hair on fire is mildly warranted. However, if, some folks in the establishment had listened to others on the ground from jump, as they should have in like 2016, I'm talking to, you guys in the committees, and the party conventions up at the top, perhaps we would not be in this debacle right now. But I'll this was my rant. I'll stop shaking my fist at the sky and let you continue on with the introduction. I apologize.
Well, no, that's great. I had a couple of rants that I was going to do, and I'm like, there is so much stuff we need to cover that those are just going to have to wait. And I might get into some of them in our discussion today. But
we don't have a guest today. It's a day of rants.
It's just, I do want people to realize, look, nothing's new under the sun.
Right. Politics revolve and
continue. We have a system that seems to make its way through some of these rough patches. Let's not deny that we're in a rough patch right now. And let's certainly not deny that, as you said, the bases of these two parties seem to be shifting fairly
dramatically
and quickly from what we have been, when we teach American government, we talk about, well, here's your Republicans and kind of the coalitions that make it up, and here's the Democrats but that doesn't really seem to hold any longer.
It's not. I don't know that it's not that it doesn't hold anymore. It's that this 18 to 35-year-old, they're starting to turn out now. The voices are more palpable, and these parties are having to react to the younger demographic. And I think that's really what we're seeing within the electorate, and certainly within the party establishment. And they're trying to buck that trend, right, by putting an octogenarian and near octogenarian, right? They're still trying to maintain that status quo and cling to what is easy and what we know will win on both sides of the aisle. But they're catering to a base that's no longer there. They're no longer satisfied with the status quo on either side.
Yeah. We should reach out to, not that he's going to have any shot at winning, but the Libertarian candidate, and see if we could get him.
Yeah.
He's not an 80-year-old who's in cognitive decline.
No, we like him a lot.
Yeah, so we ought to reach out and see if we could. He came to Rose State. That's right, for a debate.
Indeed, we enjoy him.
I think we can do our part to share other alternatives.
My face was, I went to RFK because he's tried to flip so many times. I was like, wait, James.
Where is he?
That's my line. Yeah. RFK is my line, sir. Yeah, but the Libertarian, is it Chase Oliver?
Chase Oliver.
Yeah.
Yes,
he was great. I enjoyed him.
And young, 30, 40-ish.
Yeah, he's a millennial. Yeah.
So
very good.
I
agree with that. Yes.
And it just stuns me. Here's my thing. And I am so tired.
Is this rant one?
Presidential. Okay, here's a rant, a short little rant. Get rid of I guess they kind of did. The presidential debate commission, whoever decides. If your candidate is on the ballot in all 50 states, you should be on the stage with everybody else.
Where was he in the CNN debates?
Right, because they didn't invite him.
Right, but that wasn't part of the presidential debate commission. They booked the debate commission.
They still locked him out. They still locked him out.
I have debate posters with watch party dates that are set by the presidential debate commission that these two completely.
They just basically said, "Well, we're not doing that."
This is the wrong rant for me today, James Davenport.
No, I just think the debate commission either needs to change its rules or.
I agree with that.
And every freaking media outlet that wants to host these ought to demand, if you want to participate, we're letting, if they're on all 50 state ballots, they deserve to be on the stage.
I agree. Some of the standards, however, are set by the media corporations themselves. And so a lot of them will place these arbitrary, rules, right?
Oh, if you're not polling a certain percentage or whatever.
Exactly. And of course, the margins of error on these polls are just wildly ridiculous. It excludes a lot of voices from our democracy that the people need a choice. We need a choice.
If that hadn't been any more clear after last week, it became abundantly clear. And I think, like I said, a young, articulate candidate who has full control of their mental faculties, also has impulse control, who doesn't lie. Every word that comes out of their mouth isn't a lie.
Asking for a new Obama.
I think we've got to find a way of breaking this duopoly up a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree. All right.
That's my mini rant for today.
It was a good one. I contributed to that one as well. So fair enough. We're
good. And I have a feeling this is going to be one of those shows where, we're going to be like two parallel train tracks or something that we're going to be running in the same direction. Then we're going to diverge. Then we're going to come back. We're just going to be all over the place. Yeah. So, let's get to the primaries here in Oklahoma. Quite frankly, there wasn't a whole lot coming out of them. Yeah. Everybody was kind of watching what was going to happen with the Representative Cole's race. We had a pre-conversation. We have a little bit of a take on that. I'm like, Cole won with 60+% of the vote. That seems pretty decent. You're like, yeah, but nearly 30% of those Republicans voted against him.
That's rough. If I'm a Cole campaigner, he's not ever been in real trouble. Let's be honest about this. Tom Cole has not been in real trouble. This was the real first time since he's been elected 20 years ago. 28% is nothing to, right? That's nothing to eschew. If I'm the conservative establishment, I am curious about who those 28% of human beings are and why Tom Cole, endorsed by Donald Trump, is not enough to kind of appease them. What more is needed? Was Bonder's message about him being establishmentarian? What did that play? It's right. But I do think that 28.6%, I mean, that's nothing.
That's almost a third of the electorate.
Right. And that's a big electorate, obviously, in Oklahoma. So I would be a little bit concerned about knowing who those voters are. And as you mentioned earlier, I would also be a little bit concerned if I were Ryan Walters.
I think we're going to get to Walters here in just a second on a couple of things. Yes, but I think that, yes, by and large, I would bet. And again, I haven't seen any polling or any deep dives into who was voting and what issues really played there. Right. But I would almost bet this was clearly a anti-establishment, probably not high propensity voters, which that they turned out for primary, I think these are the most Trumpian and most anti-establishment folks. But that seems to be a growing segment of that party and their base. And that explains a lot why candidates are not pushing back so much against some of the worst edges of that, right? But trying to navigate their way through and say, hey, I'm with you, but kind of at arm's length, you know, I'm with you, but we're not going to hug, you know, kind of a thing.
I think the more interesting angle on the Paul Bondar Cole story is that Paul Bondar wasn't, some fluke, right? There were Bondars, let's say, that were run in multiple states, right? And these were folks that had homes in the state that they were running in, but didn't predominantly live there. Their businesses weren't there. They were racking up multi-million-dollar media buys, things like that, and gave the establishment incumbent a run for their money. And so obviously this is part of a growing trend. And so that's why I think that 28% is not anything to just kind of dismiss. It is possible in the future for other and bigger swaths of the vote to be influenced by those kinds of messages.
Yeah, and I think, what any incumbent like Tom Cole needs to be concerned about is if this had been a candidate from Oklahoma who had a name in the state, had a reputation in the state, who was running, that changes the dynamic real quick, right? It's very easy to say this is some Texas millionaire carpetbagger trying to influence Oklahoma politics or not. But if it had been a homegrown person, that changes that dynamic real quick.
Because I think Tom Cole made the smartest decision, right, whenever he made the OU Texas football ad. That was, that man is bright. I mean, he's been doing this for a long time. He's got great strategists. That OU Texas ad, that was the nail in the coffin for Mr. Bondar.
He still understands how to connect with voters, right? Yeah. But probably the biggest earthquake in the state primaries was the defeat of Senator McCourtney, who had been the designated Senate pro tem beginning in next year. And I had talked to a lot of people this was not even on their radar that he was in trouble. And he gets defeated in his primary. This obviously throws that Republican caucus into a little bit of chaos as they search for who's going to lead. A few names seem to be emerging, but we'll wait. We'll just wait and see what happens there. But and that caucus is not, I don't get the sense that caucus is as united.
No, Lord, no.
Right. And I know Senator Treat as pro tem really had to work hard to keep that united front up there. And I think may have used up most of his political capital in this last year doing so, right? So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I'm sure there will be kind of the Trumpian kind of candidate for that. There'll be the more moderate, maybe business type candidate. So it'll
Which
be
usually
interesting.
sells in the state Senate.
Yes.
I mean, typically it is a very kind of not centrist. I wouldn't say a lot of our conservatives are centrist, but definitely more level-headed, commonsensical, typically financial or economically based appropriations chairs or folks who have sat on subcommittees, things like that for appropriations. So we'll see what's happening.
I visited with a state senator yesterday, and he had previously served in the state house. And so I was asking him about the difference, and he said the biggest difference is it's a lot more rough and tumble in the house than it is in the house is a much more raucous institution, and people in the Senate like to play nice. And he said that didn't always sit well with me because I don't always want to play nice. So that to me was the biggest news, the most significant impact coming out of that. We had a state Supreme Court decision on this notion of chartering a Catholic charter school in Oklahoma. So this is something that Superintendent Walters has been championing. Some others have been. I think the governor has been nominally kind of supportive of this. He has not been the vote.
Like he's not been the face of
right.
it. Right.
Walters has been the most vocal on
fairly
this.
Supportive,
the state Supreme Court issued a ruling saying, no, this is not, violates the state constitution, the U.S. Constitution.
Right. Which was expected.
Yes. I don't know anyone who didn't kind of expect that outcome.
Right. Because again, just to be clear, we're talking about using public funds, right? To charter and to maintain.
A specifically religious school.
And so you had a lot of pushback, right? You had, again, the Satanists from up north trying to infiltrate, right? Yeah. And so there are questions about this whenever it comes to, First Amendment rights to, freedom of religion whenever it comes to using and expending public funds. I mean, that's, I think, where the line is drawn constitutionally and judicially as well. And we kind of expected this. We know that Oklahoma it skews conservative, right? Your courts, your state, your federal offices, it skews conservative ideologically, and that's perfectly fine. But and here's Dr. Stacey's rant, Emily's rant for the day. I grew up, I'll be 40 this year, as you know. I grew up in common sense. I know, right? Thank you. Not a day over 25. I grew up in common sense, Oklahoma, right? I was born and raised in Norman, Oklahoma. And I very much recall, getting Hep A, B, C vaccines in my school, in my public school in Norman, right? We have always been commonsensical conservatives in this state. And so I don't know where this disconnect, right? There seems to be cognitive dissonance going on with, we want this, I want this, but then where it violates the Constitution. But I'm okay with that because it's what I want, right? I just don't know. I don't know, dude.
Well, I think,
ranty.
I don't know if I want to say this is the Trump effect. I think there's something like that, but there is certainly a brand of political person who calls himself conservative, but does not necessarily hold to what have traditionally been conservative principles, right? And who are much more aligned with, like you said, well, I just want this. I think this is what we should do. And don't worry about the Constitution or don't worry about these other constraints. This is what we want. This is what we think is good. And I think, we're seeing more of that emerge. And I would certainly put Ryan Walters in that category of type of politician. I get the sense there are a lot of conservatives who did not like the idea of having a religious public school.
No, because they understand what the slippery slope is there, right? Because they they fought, Mike Ritz and the 10 Commandments monument being on the state capitol, and the Satanists from Kansas shipping down the Beelzebub with 2 children sitting in its lap, because that's what you have to do on public funds, because not all taxpayers who pay into public funds and maintenance of your capital are going to be the same religion.
And so people will, I want to give people an understanding of what the argument that the folks who litigated this on the side of St. Isidore were saying, because I think it's important to understand the argument and where they're coming from. I just think it's not a great argument. So what they're trying to argue is, look, we have allowed religious institutions to provide public services. The courts have endorsed that religious institutions can provide human services in a variety of capacities, foster children services, food services, other types. And they're saying, well, education is just one more of these services that if we're going to allow private entities to do it, they should be able to do it like public schools can, right? And my thinking is, my understanding is that when the government has said, yes, these other private entities, even if they're religious, can provide these services, it has always been with the caveat, the funds that are being used cannot be in the furtherance of the religious part of their organization, right? They can't be used to reinforce the religious teaching of that organization, right? St. Isidore was not like that. We're absolutely going to be using these funds to teach religious principles from our particular faith.
As you would expect, it's a Catholic school. They have the right to do that as a private institution.
That's right. And I think that's where they're trying to come from. I think it's a poor argument that doesn't recognize what the courts have actually said in these cases. And yes, there are a lot of conservatives, a lot of libertarian types who are like, this is just the nose under the tent. You're going to end up subsuming private education under the banner of government. It's going to be telling them what to teach and all of that. And I think we should be thinking about that really seriously when we do this. So I think the state Supreme Court was right on target in saying
it was the only decision they were going to make.
And we will see now. Walters didn't just sit back and take it, though, right?
2 days later.
So what did he decide we were going to do?
2 days later. So, and this is interesting, and it'll kind of bleed into our conversation about the National Supreme Court as well, right? I was just talking to my OCCC class about this on Monday because it's been really interesting to watch how activism, whether it's judicial or legislative or bureaucratic, activism versus constructivism or kind of by the book, constitutionalism, et cetera, originalism, how those things have sort of flipped ideologically, right, on its head. And like I said, and so, Walters very much a reactionary, very much an activist. And I think that's part of that, I want this, I'm going to make it happen, regardless of, what the law says, or, we'll let the courts decide, et cetera. So he made an announcement, which made, of course, national news within hours. I got a New York Times alert letting me know that Oklahoma has now mandated the state superintendent has mandated that the Bible be taught in public schools K through 12. So this was, of course, a reaction to the St. Isidore decision, which is obviously going to be challenged, right?
I would think so, yes, right. And now, of course, he's trying to make this argument. The Bible is a historical document that is important to our country in some way, and therefore it should be taught. I have so many questions. Right? Which version of the Bible are we going to be using, right? And which parts are we supposed to be? Because there are some parts in there that would not pass. I was having this conversation. My sister, who is in public education right now, we were having this conversation a couple of days ago. There's some parts in the Bible that probably would not pass the state's guidelines about appropriate content in schools.
Would make Jesus blush, correct?
A little bit, yes. And so I'm like, what? And by the way, again, talking about conservative positions, it has long been held, at least in conservatism as I understood it, that the last thing you want is some state employee leading your child in religious instruction. Right? Who may or may not have the same religious beliefs as you do. And yet now that seems to be the direction that we're going to go, right? And so I also wonder, does Walters have the authority on his own to mandate that. There has been this conflict before between him and the legislature about him acting in ways that he was not legislative authorized to act.
And he just got smacked down by the state Supreme Court in the Edmonds case.
That's right. So I'm wondering, but again, this doesn't seem to matter. Winning, being successful does not seem to matter to him. What seems to matter is me getting my face all over the place and trying to convince whoever he thinks his supporters are, but man, he's fighting the good fight for them.
He is, and he's getting the sound bites picked up by Trump, right? He's getting that the attention from the national level that he's seeking. And so it's, I mean...
Let me just say, activists in general do not make good public officials. I'm just going to say that out loud. They generally don't.
And it's because they have an agenda, right? That is typically personal and not for the common good. And we're not accusing anybody of anything. We are simply, that is just
the way it is.
Right? It tends to be personalistic, right? And we know about those types of leaders.
And that's especially true in administrative positions, right? Because in an administrative position, you are responsible for managing processes and programs and such that rely upon effective administration. And I think folks who come from an activist background into those roles specifically aren't well prepared for that, right? And I think we're seeing that in that particular office.
Are you or your organization looking for unvarnished, unbiased scholarly political analysis for your op-eds, candidates debates, or interviews regarding all things political?
Well, look no further. We are the Democracy Slingers. We're here to host, comment, educate, or just preach the good word of American politics to your school, club, company, or organization. Get in touch with us at democracyslingers@gmail.com. All right.
Yeah.
Let's get to the big earthquake that was last week's presidential debate, right? And I know. So there was a lot of anticipation. By the way, I'm just going to say, if anyone out there hasn't seen Jon Stewart's 15-minute recap of this, it is priceless. You should see it. He does a great job of saying, well, what were the expectations going in? What did it end? And then just covering the debate. And it'll make you laugh and maybe cry at the same time. But let's start with Joe Biden, President Biden, needed. And I spoke to a conservative group a couple of days before the debate and told them, number one, this debate was more risky for Biden than it was for Trump. Number two, his primary job was to inspire confidence that he was fully competent and coherent and had a command of the issues, right? And that didn't appear at all in that debate, and that was a big fail on his part, and the fallout from that has been something to watch. The New York Times had an editorial. The editorial board calls for Biden to step down. The Atlantic had a similar one. Pundits, even Democrat Party officials are questioning whether or not he should stay in.
Governor's meeting today. Pritzker was the first yesterday to call for. So you're seeing legislators, elected officials coming out now.
The Biden camp is doing their best to say, hey, it was a one-off.
They're not.
Everybody has a bad day. This was a bad day.
No, can I stop you there, sir? Because the Biden campaign has done nothing but try to play excuses about this, right? First it was, I have a cold. And then they, whisked, the family away over the weekend. And now it's the staffer's fault. And now it was travel, right? So it was, so it's all of these various excuses and which only makes the situation worse, right? You continue to lie and point blame and finger. Dude, you had a rough night. There was, and I agree with you, and I know you were not absolutely not done with what you were saying.
No, go right ahead.
I agree with you. The format really only benefited Donald Trump. And I can understand why liberals thought that, this quiet box, this room, he can't feed off of the energy, he can't play into it, whatever. Biden desperately needed the breaking up of the audience, right? It would not have been so noticeable how much he was buffering, how much he was flustered, how much he was starting. It looked like the Nixon-Kennedy debate. Like it was. And
it was rough.
Oh my God. It was cringeworthy from the moment he lumbered, and I use that word with all the heaviness intended. He lumbered to that dais. It was just a massacre, and everything that came out of his mouth, I couldn't hear properly because my stomach was just in knots over the way that he sounded and the way that he was conveying it was not strong, not forceful, not confident. So sure, yeah, you may have had a cold, but something else was. I mean, this was.
I'm just like, that's one of those. If he had a cold, they should have made that known before the debate.
That's right.
So the expectations would be moderated, right?
Yeah,
right. So, and I was watching one, I forget which network it was, but a Democrat operative that they were talking to who said, I was texting with his campaign and asked them within a few minutes of the start, what's wrong with Joe Biden? Yes. And they said it took them 45 minutes.
Oh, I'm sure.
To respond.
Hell, I bet.
Because they were figuring out what they were going to respond.
Right, exactly.
I mean,
they knew better.
Yeah.
This was not good.
And this is not to say that Trump had some wonderful performance. I mean, but nobody expected Trump to be anything other than what Trump
he
is.
Was. Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Nobody expected that. Exactly. We expected that Trump would abuse the truth, put it politely. We expected him to over-grandize his presidency and to make exaggerated claims about Biden's. We expected all of that. There was nothing there that you couldn't. The one thing that I think, again, you said that this format benefited Trump because they controlled the mics and they could cut them off. It made him appear more restrained and less erratic or rambling than he might have otherwise.
Or like a jerk.
Right. Yeah. So. And there was plenty of his jerkiness on display, but yes, less so than what had been otherwise.
What I didn't expect was for him to turn Palestinian into a slur, or into something that was, kind of defamatory. That was, and then did it again the next day at a rally. That was a moment that will live on for a while, I think, and there are not a lot of media that have focused on that.
And there's one question that really struck me that I thought this is going to show up in some campaign ads. If Biden remains the candidate, this will appear in campaign ads. He was asked, I think Jake Tapper was the one who asked this. It was, there were roughly 80 million people who voted for Trump last time. And it looks like he's going to have similar numbers, if not a little bit higher this time. And he said, are you saying that all 80 million people there, if they vote for Trump, they're a threat to democracy? And Biden, I think, again, if I'm being generous, if I'm being charitable here, I think what he was trying to say is, Trump is a threat to democracy, and they need to recognize that. But he basically said, yes, that's what I'm saying. They are a threat to democracy. And I just think that was a really, really bad. And if I'm a moderate voter, an independent voter who is thinking about voting for Trump, and I hear that doesn't push me to Biden's side when he says you're a threat to democracy. So I was really disappointed in that answer. Obviously, his answer where he kind of stumbles at the very beginning and then ends with, we beat Medicare. And I don't think anybody knew what he was talking about. That was bad. There were other instances like that, but it was just a horrible night for him. It was. And
continues to get worse.
And this can't all be laid at his feet alone. Right. The people around him
his
who
handlers.
Have been, and I want to remind people for months now, all of these surrogates of Joe Biden have been telling us, no, he's perfectly fine. They're exaggerating. They're faking this. Yeah. He's more than capable. They can't hide the reality now, right? And I think that's where they're at, and they deserve all of the criticism and all of the pointed comments towards them that they're getting right now, because they had a hand in making that disaster occur. Yeah.
So Steve Kornacki, the nerdy numbers kid from MSNBC, who I adore, has posted a really great just snapshot of the post-debate polling. So CBS, Trump +2. Okay. Where Biden was up 1 in the previous poll. Yahoo, Trump +2, where Biden was up 2 in the last poll. CNN, Trump +6.
Wow.
Yeah, where he was still up 6 in the last poll. The last poll, however, was not done, or was last done, in April. So quite a bit away. USA Today, Trump up 3. The last poll they took in late April, it was a tie. Reuters is now at a tie. It was Trump up 2 a couple of weeks before the debate, so it's now at a tie, which is the only good one for Biden. And then the Morning Consult is up Trump 1, where it was a tie. So, I mean, all of these polls are up Trump.
Are moving in Trump's direction.
Right. And this was he just posted this 37 minutes ago. So entirely post-debate polling is showing that Biden is not doing well.
And the trap that the Democrats have put themselves in is if they want to make a switch,
it's got to be now. It had to be yesterday, really.
Really, you can't drag this out very long, right?
No. And it's got to be somebody
the Democrat National Convention takes place when? Is it this month or next month? I think it's is it?
I'm pretty sure it's this month.
The incumbent party usually gets the second convention, right? The challengers convention happens first, and then the incumbent.
No, you're right. I'm sorry. The 19th through the 22nd.
Okay, of August.
Yes.
Okay.
My bad.
And, so they can't wait until the convention to make this happen, right? And even now, let's say Joe Biden comes out and says, you know what? For the good of the party, for the good of the country, I'm gonna pull an LBJ, and I'm not going to. Yeah. The question still remains: who replaces him?
Right. Right. So as I have been, so have your hair on fire, and that's great. But yeah, who's next? Because Gavin Newsom doesn't translate. Gretchen Whitmer, does not translate. Kamala Harris, we know, does not translate on a national level. Not even within the entirety of the Democratic Party. Right. And so the galvanization factor has to be high. So we're looking at possibly a Bernie Sanders or possibly like a Michelle Obama type of, it would have to be that kind of get in order for there to be full buy-in and for there to be a snowball's chance, I think.
And honestly, I don't get the sense that if Biden were to step down, there's just going to be some unity around an alternative. There's going to be 4 or 5 or more that are going to jump into this thing, and they're going to fight to the convention. Mm-hmm. And that convention could end up looking really ugly.
Chaos. Yeah,
right?
2016 RNC style. Yeah, right. Just absolutely rough. Rules being changed at the last moment in order to galvanize a candidate or a nominee, et cetera. Yeah, it would be absolute chaos. So I don't know.
And that was one of Biden's arguments. I saw Biden had put out some survey. His campaign had put out some showing that, looking at him versus Trump and then a bunch of other of these kind of potential candidates, and all of their polling was lower. My argument is, but nobody's expecting them to be the nominee right now, right? When they have one. Now we beat up on President Biden and the Democrats a little bit. I'm just going to make this point. Republicans, had you nominated somebody who was sane, somebody who had some connection to the truth, somebody who could display some amount of self-control, these poll after that, if they had a debate with Biden in that condition, this race would be over.
Yeah, I agree.
It would be over if that had been Nikki Haley. Heck, if that had even been Ron DeSantis, this race would likely be over at this point.
It would have been rough if it would have been Nikki Haley.
Yes.
She would have eaten him.
Right.
Oh, it would have been terrible.
And I think again, the Republican Party is so tied to the hip to Donald Trump that it will shoot itself in the foot to save face with him, right? And I just think I don't get it. I do not get it. I don't get both of these parties at this point. They do not seem to have the best interest of the public at large. They have the best interest of their parties at large and maintaining power. But I don't see them doing the things that would say. And Ezra Klein has been making this point, and I think it's a really valid point and something some people that need to start addressing, which is the Democrats have said, Trump is a threat to democracy. If Trump gets reelected, our democracy is in peril, right? They've been saying this. And Klein is making the point, and it's clear that Biden will not defeat him. And if Democrats think that Trump is a threat to democracy, then they should do everything they can to prevent him from becoming elected, which means replacing Biden. And so that leaves you with the question, do they really think Trump is that much of a threat to democracy? Or is that just a soundbite that they think is good for the campaign?
I think that they think that he is that big of a threat to democracy, but they've been a do-nothing party. They have been a feckless party for 25 years. They have been the nice party. They've been the let's play the compromise part, especially Joe Biden. I mean, he's the pacifier in chief. He has been the absolute let's, kumbaya and try to get everybody involved. And that is, the other team has not been playing that game since Reagan.
But if you remember, that was why he was elected, right? Joe Biden will bring in moderates. He won't scare moderate or independent voters away. He won't. He's been in the Senate for a long time. He knows how to work with the other side.
Here we are,
and he's electable, right? He's electable.
Yeah,
and that
I don't want to hear that word in relation to Joe Biden ever again. I know.
And so I do think they're in a bit of a bind, and Republicans are going to even ramp up. I mean, there's not going to be.
They're going to capitalize on this, and they should.
They are
as a party,
and the reality is, we very well may be looking at a second Trump term at this point.
It's a foregone conclusion for me.
And there are a lot of people who are I'm concerned about that. I do not think Trump was a good president in the first go around. I think he's going to be even a worse president the second go around because he's not going to feel constrained, right? This is his last opportunity. And so any inhibitions that he might have had, and he's never been one to have a lot of inhibitions personally or professionally in his life. And now he's going to have the machinery of government to fulfill those.
And there won't be the gatekeepers that were there before.
Right. I think that's right.
I
think it's clear that the people who are really pushing him are going to work to ensure that only people loyal to Trump are in these appointed positions, that there won't be people pushing back against some of his agenda. Yeah, no, I think that's correct. And I don't think that's good. I don't think that's good.
No, because we're setting a precedent, right? This is, oh my goodness, shake my fist. Don't let me, bang on the table, man. You are setting a standard, a precedent for the next president. I want you people to think about that. So if Trump's your worst nightmare, or Bernie Sanders is your worst nightmare, or Kanye West is your worst nightmare, if you allow your favorite person, the person you want to have all of these powers as president, the next person who might be your worst nightmare will have those same powers. Understand this. That's not the way a democracy should work.
I would love for the silver lining of this whole episode to be, we begin to seriously rethink the powers we want to devolve to the presidency, right? It would be nice if we said, you know what, maybe we want Congress to reassert itself.
Congress should work.
Right. Yeah, that would be great.
Maybe we should make these people function instead of throw, anyway, moving on.
Let's get to we could do a whole rant as an episode at this point.
We love communication that goes both ways, not just you listening to us pontificate. We would love to hear from our audience. If you have comments, suggestions, or would like to contact us about possibly being a guest on the show, please email notmygeneration@raider.rose.edu.
Let's move on to some Supreme Court decisions. There was a bevy of them. As is usual, they tend to save the most controversial cases till the end. And so there was a slew of cases that were published. The
Thursday through Monday.
And so I have a feeling you might have some that you'll pull out and look at. So let's see what we've got.
I mean, I don't really know what to say. The Supreme Court has been shocking. This particular, obviously, composition has been very interesting, right? We just had the conversation with the Politico author about, the 333 court. Right. They've been making some fairly split decisions, right? I don't know, dude. So we had another leak, right? So let's start there. I think the Idaho emergency abortion leak was again very telling about the Roberts court, right? Typically, Chief Justice John Roberts has prided himself and his court on being sterling, right? Being this kind of sacred, box. But there have been two pretty huge leaks, right? Obviously, before the Dobbs decision came down a couple of summers ago, and then this one that obviously had to do with emergency abortions.
Yeah, apparently there was something posted on the Supreme Court's website before the opinion had been released, and that they pulled that back.
But it was already
somebody had already
right, because this is the digital age, and so we kind of knew what was going to happen, and of course the court did what it is kind of prone to do, this court specifically, and kicked it back down to the states. Right. And so...
although they did indicate, if I remember right, that there is some that they can't deny emergency, right? But yes, by and large, they sent this back to the state for
and then the state immediately banned them. You're right. It's
so we're going to be back.
So
here.
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. So I think that, the abdication of power is really interesting because this court seems to, and of course, federalism and all of this good stuff. And you can go on your libertarian federalism rant momentarily. But I do think it is interesting that this court tends to be sort of kicking things back down to the states for them to decide specifically. Now moving on to the immunity
case.
Do
you have what the breakdown? What was that a 6-3? Was that a
Idaho?
7-2? I don't remember. I'm wondering if in delaying or not issuing an opinion is a way for Roberts to gain greater support for some of these decisions. It's like, hey, let's what can we agree on? We can agree on this. Yeah. We can't agree on this, so we'll punt the rest back.
Exactly. It was 6-3.
Okay, so it was 6-3. Is it the classic? Okay, so that was one of those. So interesting. Okay. There was also a gun one, which I thought was interesting. I don't remember the name of it, but basically, can states deny people who have protective orders from possessing guns, right? And the court ruled, yes, they can, right? So that was an interesting one that I think a lot of people were somewhat nervous about. And obviously, especially if you've been in one of those situations, you're going to be really nervous about that.
Right. That one was an interesting one. I believe, if I am not mistaken, that Thomas was the only one who dissented.
I think that's right.
And his dissent was not super uplifting for for victims of so anyway, I just thought I'd mention that sometimes the dissenting opinions are quite interesting to read. Where do you want to go next?
There's one that I'm going to pull out. We have to talk about the presidential immunity. Let's save it to last. Okay. There might be I don't want to say there's going to be a lot of disagreement between us on that, but I think there might be a little bit. But the Chevron case. So there's something called the Chevron doctrine that has been around since the 80s, in which the courts have basically said if Congress writes this vague law and then allows the administration and the agencies to fill in the gaps through rulemaking and such, that the courts are going to give deference to those agencies unless there's some clear indication that Congress didn't do that. Those of us who are more on the libertarian side have always had some angst against this because it gives my perspective, and I'm going to speak for me. I think it gives unelected people who we can't assume are just there doing their job out of the pure goodness and trying to do what's best for the people. These are people who have all the same flaws that the rest of us do. It gives them the ability to make up the law where Congress, again, as we said, didn't do its job to make this stuff clear. And so I've always had real heartburn with Chevron deference. There's a lot of people who say, this is going to end the administrative state as we know it. The administrative state grew just fine prior to the ruling that established this doctrine. I think it's going to be okay. I don't think you're going to see, the collapse of government agencies and the ability of them to.
Do you worry about institutional decline or institutional knowledge declining because the propensity for political appointees to be put in as opposed to, maintaining the kind of status quo bureaucracy?
I think there's a line there, right? Yes. I don't want purely political appointees. I don't want to go back to like the Jackson era of I'm appointing all my friends to these low-level administrative positions who have no competence whatsoever. I don't want to go to that.
It worries me that like having a Scott Pruitt in charge of the nukes, right? I want a nuclear physicist or somebody else there, right?
I think, but if it's an appointed position that the Senate has that's
a different story.
Then I think that's where we come back and say, pardon my French, do your damn job.
I agree, and not vote the party line. These need to be seriously considered.
Demonstrate competence.
That part. So when are we going, this is a whole nother rant, but when are we going to start holding these people accountable and paying attention to the job that they're doing?
That's an excellent question. Right?
Dr. Stacey's on a rant.
That is an excellent question, right? When are we going to say, hey, you folks in Congress, do the job we elect you to do?
It takes us to do that, right? It takes the democracy. It takes citizens to do that, man.
And the bottom line is, unfortunately, a lot of this stuff is so technical in the sense that, who should be making these rules and what rules should be made. And the average citizen is not going to take the time, and I don't blame them, to go research all of that and figure out this stuff.
Administrative rules particularly is wonky.
They want to be able to rely on the people they elect to ensure that this is going on, right? And at some point, we've got to say, you're not doing the job. Yeah. I realize that, okay, you vote for me, you vote the way I want you to vote on taxes or abortion or whatever, but you're not doing some really important pieces of the job, and we need somebody who's going to do that, right? I don't know when that's going to come out. All right, let's get to the presidential immunity case. This is another one that a lot of people, there's a lot of hand-wringing and wailing and gnashing of teeth, as my religious folks will identify with, going on right now. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, this is just going to allow the president to assassinate a political opponent or whatever. I think that's a little bit of an overreaction. And before we go there, I just want to remind some things of some really bad stuff some presidents have done that they have not been prosecuted over, and we have accepted that they're not going to be, right? President Bush initiated a war against Iraq, killing hundreds of thousands of Iraqis.
Which Bush?
Right? Bush number 2, right? This was ostensibly as claiming that they had two things, that they had some role in the 9/11 attacks and they had weapons of mass destruction. None of that. Nobody's held him accountable. Nobody's saying we should prosecute him. Maybe a few on the fringe, but nobody who has any influence is saying that. Barack Obama used drones to strike a U.S. citizen who happened to be on foreign soil under the auspices that he was a terrorist. No due process, none of that. Then a few weeks later, did the same thing to this person's son, and nobody's saying, oh, wait, we need to prosecute him for those acts as well. So this ruling from a certain perspective, and I haven't read the entire thing, and I'm not going to endorse the entire thing at this point, but I'm going to say this ruling seems to just confirm what we already knew, which is presidents can do a whole heck of a lot, and a lot of it bad stuff, and we're not going to haul them into court afterwards for doing that. And I have trouble believing that if what they're saying is, well, he can't be prosecuted for his role in January 6th because of this ruling, I don't see that inciting a riot in the Capitol that obstructed a lawful governmental action falls within the official duties of a president. There's no law that confirms that. Just as I don't see there's a law that confirms that the president can assassinate a political opponent just because they feel like it. And if there are laws that we can say he could interpret it this way, then maybe we should think again about Congress and what kind of laws that body's writing. Because that's my concern. Now, I don't endorse the idea that I don't want to give Trump any more leeway than is absolutely 100% necessary. To the extent that this law, and Trump is already interpreting it that way, this is my concern. This ruling, I can do whatever I want. They can't. If Republicans let him get away with that, they have only themselves to blame because, like you said, the next Democrat that comes in is going to play by those rules. They're going to play by the rules that are set down before them. This is how this works.
Yeah.
And all those Republicans who want Trump to have a free reign, as you said, imagine Bernie Sanders, imagine AOC, imagine Chuck Schumer, or whoever you want to imagine, whoever is your worst nightmare as president, imagine them having those same powers, right? And it's at some time we got to think long-term and not immediate term. And I don't want Trump to have any more. And this is my concern about this ruling is it gives a perception at the very least that he literally can do whatever he wants. I don't believe that. I don't believe that that's what they said. They basically, as you said, punted this back down to the courts to say, you need to decide what's an official act versus an unofficial act, right?
That part. I'm gonna let you finish.
I think they could have. I think they could have, in the instance before them, whether it was January 6th, they could have made that decision when they issued this ruling and said, this action here falls outside of his presidential. They didn't have to punt that, right? They didn't have to punt that.
They could have listened to the commission the committee that was put together that, good old traitor Liz Cheney is still having to lob insults
That's
from.
correct. So I agree with the people who are concerned that the perception that this ruling gives is that that Trump will have a free hand. I'm going to go read it and then I'll make up my own mind if that's what it really did. But if Republicans let him act that way, that's on them.
Right. So my take on this is not as I don't know. I
isn't it weird? Sometimes we, like I said, we're going to kind of go like this way.
That you assume that my hair is on fire just all the time because I'm
not necessarily you, but there are a lot of people whose hair are on fire. I'm just
centrist than that. Thank you. No, what bothers me about this? Number one, you hit at the very end of your rant, the fact that there was no definition, there was no designation, demarcation line of what is an official versus unofficial or public versus private act. And this was actually a footnote that one of the conservative-leaning justices, Comey Barrett, put into her opinion. Her concurring opinion was, hey, if it is done, as a private individual, it is still subject to legal prosecution. That's an important distinction. And so I don't know that I agree with you, or maybe I do, depending on how the wording was. Trump was not acting in an official capacity on January 6th, right? He was acting as candidate Trump, right? That is an unofficial capacity as a private individual, meaning that inciting a riot would be legally prosecutable, right?
That is my opinion.
So, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. So I feel like, again, this Supreme Court, the specific composition is afraid to rule on, right, to make a definitive action on a lot of these that deal directly with Donald Trump. So it bothered me that there was no definition there. And I'm going to take it right to you, sir, because I know how this is going to hurt your heart. Hamilton said in Federalist 69, right? He lays out presidential impeachment. He lays out the reasons: treason, bribery, high crimes, misdemeanors. And also notes in 69, which is not nearly mentioned often enough, that a president would always be liable to prosecution and punishment in the ordinary course of law, quote unquote.
Right.
That is an important line.
I'm right there with you.
Right.
A president cannot violate the law.
Right.
Right.
And so this is why I am mildly concerned. It's not just the appearance. It's that I am now afraid that these state governments or these, these federal courts that are packed in some cases with Trump appointees, Biden, whatever, that they get to decide what's official and unofficial, and Congress and the Supreme Court have abdicated that very crucial definition. Then what happens whenever the definition is not unified, right? It is stratified between states. I don't know. I worry, and this might be the hair on fire, but this, I was reading a PBS interview with a legal analyst, Heather Cox Richardson, who noted that this change is effectively saying that one of the three branches can't be checked by the other two in some way.
I'm not there yet. And if it does say that, then I'm completely not there. Right. The idea that a president would be unconstrained by either Congress and that's not true. I mean, Congress can impeach them. Right. Whether or not they have the political will.
If the act is the act official or unofficial? And at that point, right? So that's the important part. So the articles of impeachment, they originate in the House of Representatives, but who gets to decide? So typically it would be the majority of House members, but at that point, would a state then kick it up, or would the federal court kick up those charges to the House to begin articles of impeachment? Who gets to decide what's an official act or an unofficial act to begin the process of impeachment?
So remember, impeachment is not a legal process.
No,
right?
It's not a legal process.
The House can impeach a president for whatever reason it wants
Fair enough.
right? Does not have to demonstrate that the president broke the law. I think that's part of the problem in the impeachment of Trump. They were trying too hard to say he broke a law somewhere, and they had trouble identifying that. And so that process can happen. That's fair, irrespective of the courts. The problem is, as we've just discussed, will the president's party in modern politics ever be willing? Will they ever have a Nixon moment where you have the senators of his party going to the White House saying, "You're done"? Yeah. Right. That's the problem. Is people saying, "We're not going to abandon the American people for the sake of your political ego or your political career." And right now, I'm not sure there are enough people on either side in positions of power willing to do that. Maybe the Democrats will demonstrate some of that with the Biden situation of saying your political career is not more important than the country. But I don't know.
I love how, one party has to always.
No, I just don't think there's any hope for the Republican
Party.
There's not.
I know.
Right?
I know. It just,
if a party is going to do that in this environment, it's going to be the Democrat Party.
You're correct.
That's going to be the case. I would love for the Republican Party. I've been asking the Republican Party to do that since 2016, and they have not. So that's it.
I know.
We're about out of time. There's a lot more to cover. We're going to be here watching all of this stuff, keeping you informed. Keep firing off questions to us. And remember, you can change this, right? If you get your voice out there, if you get active, you work with other people, you can change the course of this country. But you have to remember, as we like to end every show.
That's right. Democracy is not a spectator sport, my friends.
Next time.
This is Deborah, the resident Gen Z member of the Not My Generation podcast family. Not My Generation is produced in the Possibilities Inc. studio. This episode was produced by Santiago Ramones. It was edited by Santiago Ramones. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. Send a voice memo to notmygeneration@raider.rose.edu and you could hear your voice on an upcoming episode. If you liked today's episode, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and sharing the podcast with others. You can check out previous episodes on any podcast app and on our podcast website at notmygeneration.captivate.fm, where we also provide our show notes. And remember, you can follow Not My Generation on X, formerly known as Twitter, at NMG Podcast, and on Facebook at Not My Generation Podcast. We look forward to interacting with you soon.